Hello, and welcome to the PowerPlay series. I'm Darren Peters. We're absolutely delighted today to be joined by a woman who is using her power and influence of storytelling in several different forms. As an actress, film producer, corporate executive, activist, and podcaster, Erika Alexander is a true 21st century social engineer with a bent towards social justice. You will know Erika from a variety of American classics like The Cosby Show and the beloved Living Single series where she played Maxine Shaw. She's appeared in several movies, the Academy Award-winning Get Out, and most recently Wu-Tang, an American Saga on Hulu. But she's also appeared in a host of others as well. I'm fortunate enough to know her as a colleague and a friend.
Thank you. I'm so happy for that. I like to be the person something. You know, it's very hard nowadays with so many wonderful Black people and all their accomplishments. So, boom, one. I'll take it.
All right, so let's get started. Now, you're doing so much. Your social justice advocacy within your own field of entertainment, activism for social justice, all of these things are quite commendable. But you're probably doing things that I have not mentioned. If someone were to ask you what you do for a living, how would you describe your work?
Well, now after having had the few years that I've had making documentaries and also podcasts inside of very specific social issues, I'd say, and this would be giving a tip of my hat to the great John Lewis, that I'm doing my best to make good trouble wherever I go. So I'm a good troublemaker, and that's my job.
Great. Well, we know a lot about you and what you've been up to in the entertainment space. But could you tell us more about your work with Color Farm Media and Concrete Park?
Sure. So Color Farm Media is my company. I am co-founded it with Ben Arnon, who is the CEO, and I'm the COO, if you want to be more specific. And we founded that company because we were trying to, our goal was to change the face of media. I have my background in film, television, and stage since I was 14. And it's been a very long time that I've been in that space. And I've been able to see the changes that are happening right now. But for a very long time, it was very the static, the static quo. And it was awful because if you were a person of color, you really had to depend on the kindness of strangers, or for the most of the time, to get a job. And when I say strangers, meaning people who did not know you, the community, and or our stories. And we worked for a very long time in a space that was mostly guided and told through the point of view of white male storytellers. And that's unfortunate. Can you imagine if music only came through one voice as opposed to all the voices that we know, from Stevie Wonder to Prince to Michael Jackson to all sorts of people? Well, that's what it was like and is very much like still. So we thought we wanted to create a company that really targeted the 5 biases that we see in this industry. The 4 big ones are race, gender, disability, obviously, and location, geographic problems, and ageism is the other. And so we did. We met during our time as being in political campaigns. It's like how I met you, Darren, and he was an Obama surrogate, and I was a Hillary surrogate in 2008 at the DNC convention in Denver, and just became friends. And then later on started talking about our shared goal to create a company that really exemplified and showed what the real true face of media was. It has never been only one thing, and Black people and brown people are not in the minority when it comes to buying the tickets and supporting all of these projects, but they are very much in the minority, and women as well, when it comes to who gets the budgets and who gets to make them. So we've seen changes, but that's what our goal is and continues to be. Concrete Park is a graphic novel that me and my collaborator, Tony Puryear, made into a graphic novel because we were trying to make a film and television show, but we got so much racism that we sort of pivoted and decided to make a graphic novel because it was more of a DIY project, do it yourself. And we could do it because the margins it was accessible for us to control. We had an infamous conversation with a media president of a big production company, a studio, and he told us to our face that Black people didn't like science fiction because they couldn't see themselves in the future, which we knew was a lie because at the time, Will Smith was the biggest science fiction star in the world. He certainly hadn't heard of Samuel Delaney and people like Octavia Butler who ruled in that space, but also that means that he had never considered turning on his TV and the volume to his radio to realize that he was living in the future that Afrofuturists had created his whole life. In fact, the American culture is built on the futurism and the optimism and the futurists that African Americans have been and have always had to be, whether you were Louis Armstrong or Stevie Wonder or Prince or any of these people, but also the fact that much of our culture stems from the fact that they took our past, they didn't give us much of a present, so we created in the future. And you got jazz and you got rock and roll and hip hop and all these wonderful things. And that's what makes American culture powerful and translates throughout the world. So we made a comic book because we knew he was wrong. And we made a comic book because we knew that as a business model that we could actually complete it. And now we own IP. So Dark Horse was the publisher that we hooked up with. Mike Richardson, to his credit, understood creators, but he understood also independent creators. Hellboy, Sin City, The 300, he had published those things. And we got to not only publish, but also keep ownership of our IP.
That's some really, really, really fascinating stuff. So I'm glad you're out there continuing to do such great work and being creative at the same time.
Thank you. Me too.
I'm also interested in your podcast, Big Payback. The bill HR 40, the effort to study reparations, is currently being discussed in Congress. What does this mean to your community and others? And then also speak a little bit about, you spoke earlier about Good Trouble and your involvement with John Lewis in that documentary. If you could touch on that a little bit, we'd be interested in hearing about that as well.
Sure. Well, HR 40 is a bill that the great John Conyers had proposed and infamously has taken 30 years for it to even be voted on and put into markup, which it was the other day, this past April, at the end of April. And Sheila Jackson Lee took it forward when John Conyers retired. But HR 40 is talking about the promise of America's obligation to the debt of what does it owe the African descendant or American descendants of slaves since reparations. The first reparations proposed were famously called 40 Acres and a Mule, but it was off Sherman's General Sherman the Black leadership came to them and said, you just can't let all these slaves go. We don't have anything. We need something. And Reconstruction was going to start. And so he signed a bill. And then when Lincoln was assassinated, they pulled that back. And very few people, if any, got anything from that. They've been trying for years to do reparations, whether it was Queen Mother Moore or Callie House. In different ways, people have been saying that you owe Black people restitution. And we've never been in a position of power to make it happen. Not a position of power of voting, not a position of power of ownership or any of these things. And now here we are in 2021 still making that case. And so that's what HR 40 is for. It's a study. It's simply a study to say, if slavery has held a certain group under horrific, torturous conditions, what ramifications still play within the descendants of those slaves, and do we owe them anything at all? And if so, how could we do it? What types of remedy can we give? It's called appropriate remedies to these issues. That we have been following since Juneteenth 2019, when they first had the first hearing committee, and there was Ta-Nehisi Coates and Danny Glover, and of course some critics there. And then also to its recent markup, which it actually was voted in because it has the Democrats are in the majority, and now it'll go to the floor. So that's what it's about. It's a study. So we're studying that. We're also looking at Evanston. We have our documentary is about HR 40 and Evanston. What's happening in Evanston, Illinois, with Alderman Robin Ruth Simmons, is that she's passed the first reparations bill in history, in American history. She did it in 2019. So we're thinking about the year of return and all those things that happened. She was passing that in her small local council. It was actually a council of mostly white people that counseled it. It was passed on a vote of 8-1, 3 Black and whatever, do the math. I'm sorry, I'm a little, so that we've been looking at that, and that's the documentary. We've been doing it all through COVID, and it's been amazing. Good Trouble. I produced a film along with Laura Michael Chisholm, who is partners with Dawn Porter. Dawn Porter was our director for the documentary John Lewis, Good Trouble, obviously about the great congressman, the iconic Congressman John Lewis, his career, and also about what Good Trouble is, what work he's done on the Hill as a congressperson, but also his grassroots organization and his background as a sharecropper in the South. So we were very pleased to do that, and I was very blessed that because of my conversations and relationships within the campaign that I met you in, which is the Hillary Clinton campaign, 2 cycles of her running for president, I met the most amazing people, including you, Darren, and I also met the congressman, and I met Rachel O'Neill, who was his constituent representative, and she said, I hear you have a new production company. This might be a great project for you. And that's often you need friends to sponsor you in those places. And she did, and we did Good Trouble. We're very proud of it. And we're very happy we got to do it because we did not know that COVID was coming. We certainly didn't know that the congressmen would be ill and end up passing away. So it just all came together just in the nick of time.
Great, thank you. I know you're proud of all the work that you're doing. The pandemic is forcing many people to reassess the work they do. As a resilient person who has successfully followed her passions, what would you tell someone who's following theirs?
Well, I think that to follow your passion is smart, but to also have purpose and to prepare yourself. So passion, purpose, and preparation is exactly what you need to move forward. Often our passions, well, we're not best suited for because we didn't know what all went into it. And I found out there's many things that I was passionate about. I didn't have the skill set. Booyah, surprise, surprise. So you got to go learn. And if you can't learn, you got to know that, that's what it's going to take no matter what you do in order to excel and elevate yourself and most definitely stick out. There's so many people out there doing wonderful things. You have to think about them as not competition, but how can you learn from them? And then how can you springboard off of their success and or failures and build upon it? So I think that's important people be passionate about what they do. It's not always the case that you can be. Sometimes you're making ends meet. You're trying to build a step and build a story so you can get to that place. And we need to honor those steps. We don't, I think some people look at their lives and feel like they should already be there. I don't know anybody that was ever where they were supposed to be at the beginning. And if they were, they usually had things handed to them. And that means that they have a lot more to learn than just getting there. They have to learn how to stay there or, what attracts people to the cause that they're going to do, not just a paycheck, but whether they really are in a leadership position, because being a leader means you're usually wanting to attract strong people to your cause, and strong people do not follow. They love to be in a space where they're valued, and they need leadership. And that's what I think, that it's time for everybody to ante up and make sure that they have the skill sets necessary.
I would agree. And let me piggyback a little bit on the pandemic question.
Mhm.
It can be really hard to unplug right now, especially for artists like yourself. How are you choosing to unwind and just enjoy life?
Darren, if you got a if you got a handle on that, you might as well give it to me. You know, I'm sure a lot of people are finding solace in wine. That's not my thing. I usually, I love to do, I really do just love to hang out and read and just think. I'm a big thinker. I love to contemplate the verities, as my old English teacher used to say. She said, sit down, be quiet, and contemplate the verities, whatever that meant. But I am that person. I like to do just the very simple things in life, maybe because it allows my brain to just check out a bit and power down, because I think your best ideas need a place to replicate, but also find themselves. And if you're always constantly taking in new things and other people's ideas, you don't know how to take your RAM that's in there and source and file all the things you've seen. So it becomes a part of you, or you take it out and go, well, I don't really believe that. Or what was I going to do with that? Like, you have to be quiet. So that's what I'd say. One thing, you have to turn things off. It's so easy to think you're turning things off and then put your headphones on and put music on, but that's not turning things off either. I don't know if people realize what the sound of silence really is. And I'm not talking about true silence where there's nothing you can hear, but that you're hearing the ambient noise around you, the radiator, the traffic outside, the walls talk, people going in and out of doors, and just allowing themselves to be. That's so restorative, and especially for artists, it's important to do. I'm not saying it's easy to do, it's important. The other thing is obviously reading long form, not short, not easily digestible, but forcing your brain to sit there and take in one long idea. I think it's very important for building memory and keeping your memory, but also for teaching your brain that it does have that skill set. We learned it in school. You would go and you sit through a class for an hour, but then you'd go home and do homework, and then every day work on something, and you would build the process. And then over time, you say, oh, now I know how to do that. We look at other people do it on YouTube and think we know how to do it. We do not know how to do it. And here's the other loss that we're doing with GPS. We're not even learning how to walk around and think for ourselves in terms of location. We let the GPS do everything. Turn the GPS off and try to get there yourself. Look at the directions and say, I'm going to learn the streets around me. I'm going to see what's happening with detours and construction. I'm going to actually look, as opposed to letting this thing lead me while the music is blaring, while I'm talking on the phone. Do that too. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Or I'm gonna remember my friend or my kid's telephone number instead of just looking at the phone and clicking a button to give them a call.
Or my own. There's many people who don't know their own phone numbers. And by the way, I remember my mother, it's good that you brought that up, making us learn our phone number and our address and our zip codes. Do we know that the children, I don't have any children, know, especially young people, how to find their parents if they lost everything? They need to know that. They need to know those numbers by heart, we used to say.
They definitely do, and hopefully we'll start to do a better job of pushing that out there. Now, I got one last question for you. This is the PowerPlay series. So, if you were given one PowerPlay, meaning the opportunity to solve one issue in your field, what would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a good thing. One opportunity to solve one thing in my field.
Mm-hmm.
It would be, I think they're tied to each other, so I'm trying to say they're one thing. but
Yeah.
it would be budgets and distribution. So I would say really budgets. The reason is there's a lot of people throwing money to, especially after the George Floyd um, horribleness and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. Last year was a really complicated year, and a lot of corporate people started looking at ways that they could so-called support grassroots organizations and or creators of color, but just people of color. Um, but the budgets are small in
Mm-hmm.
comparison. If you were to go someplace, and I really wish somebody would do this study and say, yes, they might have made more of this and that, but if the budgets are 10% or less than what they normally give other budgets, then we're not really talking about equity. And we need equity in order to build the strength and audience and also to create the types of content that can compete in a marketplace. So most often you're seeing creators of color, because I'm going to talk about film, television, podcasts, of having to do less with more. We've always done that. But can't we do more with more? I would like to do more with more sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Give me what you gave that soap opera, blah, 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 nondescript over there with a mostly cast of white cast. Give me that same thing. Let's see what we rock and roll with that. So I believe that the budgets are not artificially low. They're low, but they're giving monies out. I think that if you want to see an example of where that matters, you look at Black Panther. Black Panther got the full weight and support of Marvel, right? You saw that movie. They didn't
Yeah.
stand on anything. It was in the Marvel, um, you know, power. Talk about power play. That's their power play, is all putting all those movies together. They weren't going to skimp on it. So you see what happens when we can compete at that level, but also that the budget matches it. Creed, would a movie about a black fighter have gotten that type of reception if it had not been for Sylvester Stallone having all those years to build the Rocky brand to suddenly advance the cause of a black fighter in the movie space? Now, what's ironic is we are the heavyweight fighters in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it took the fake, fictitious Italian fighter to suddenly create the strength that Sylvester Stallone needed to actually advance the cause of the Creed line. I don't know if you see how absurd that is, but that's absurd. That's like saying for many years an Italian runner, and I'm just making him Italian, don't think I'm making a race, keeps beating everybody in running, even though we are the runners that beat everybody. And then suddenly 40 years, 50 years later, they actually make a franchise movie out of somebody who's black, who's a fast runner. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an example that, and this fits with reparations, and some of the conversation that we've had is somebody gave an example and said, the game of Monopoly. You play the game, and each player gets to go around the board, and every time they get around and pass go, they get $200, and they can use that money as income to purchase property as they go around the board again. Well, for a lot of us, we've been playing Monopoly. We've been going around that board and not collecting $200. Then all of a sudden, we are told, everything is equal and go out and buy any property you want. Well, you're not going to get that property on Boardwalk because you missed out on all the money, during the history of the game. So I see where you're coming from, and I hope and I think we're doing better in trying to make progress.
And by the way, Darren, they didn't just not give us that $200 every time we went on board. They took $200 out of our pocket and then said,
Yeah.
why can't you keep up?
Yeah. Well, look, that's all the time we have today. And of course, we wish you continued success. Can you let us know where our viewers can find you on social media?
Sure. You can find me at Erika Alexander the Great on Instagram and Erika Alexander on Facebook, and also E the Great on or no, E Alex the Great, excuse me, on Twitter. Just look up my name, Erika Alexander, to pop up. That's
Right.
and you can see that I love the great. So just if you want to that, that's it. But that's where you can find me. And by the way, we're doing Concrete Park NFTs now. We sold out of our first launch. We were the first African-American comic book to launch in the NFT space. And so we're really excited about what's going forward with that. Everything's sold out. So for everybody who supported that, that's great. But the digital space is nascent, but it's moving into a very interesting space to talk about direct payments and compensation to artists as opposed to going through a middleman. And that's exciting. One day we'll talk about that.
All right. Erika, we couldn't think of a better first guest to kick off the PowerPlay series. So thank you again. Catch the series on the Peter Damon Group social media platforms at Peter Damon Group on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Until next time, thank you for joining us.